With My Hero at the tail end of its story, we have Deku finally fighting, All for One / Shigaraki, the super mega bad guy. And with surety, I can predict Deku will be coming out victorious. I wanted to take a second to reminisce on a show that I used to adore, where my feelings started to fade and how now all I feel is indifference when the newest chapter drops. But before we really do get anywhere, read Vigilantes, read Vigilantes, read Vigilantes. While the show had already begun and well into its second season by the time I started watching it, for me, it was literally one of the first anime I ever really watched. Introduced to me by my friends because of its similarity to Marvel and superheroes, I quickly fell in love with the show. Going through that first season was really something special as I had never seen anything like this, and Studio Bones' animation quality cemented it in my mind as something new and original. On top of that, I at the time was also in high school. While nothing compared to UA and becoming a superhero, I could relate to the expectations that come with being a student. With a world full of interesting powers, charming characters, and a main protagonist that I saw at the time could be built upon, those were the times. Season 1 ends with not only one of the best fight scenes out of the show, it has one of the best monologues that I secretly use as motivation in the gym. And it caps off the first season clearly, defining what I see as central themes to what being a hero is, what it means to have a quirk, and how good people are needed to stop those who want to destroy the society that has been built around them. This is the idea that I was sold on, the things that I became attached to, and it is here where I think My Hero succeeds most. The first season lays a framework for singular big events to happen that I think poignantly describe the aspects of the world that are not unchanging, but fundamental to how the author Horikoshi represents powers. These are events like All Might vs. Nomu, the entire Stain saga, Deku vs. Shoto, Lemillion vs. Overhaul, All Might vs. All for One, and Endeavor vs. High-End Nomu at the end of Season 4. Like I said earlier, one of my favorite moments from the show happens at the end of Season 1. It's when Shigaraki attacks Class 1A for the first time, and we see our protagonist struggle to survive until All Might gets there. It's here where we see defiance become a central idea that our heroes embody. Shigaraki is so sure that his plan will work, but Class 1A defies that idea and struggles with throws against the utter reality of their situation. The impossibility of standing against such powerful quirks like the high-end Nomu, Kurogiri, and Shigaraki was such a force that not even Aizawa with other pro heroes could help stand against. But they do, until All Might arrives. It is here we see another reoccurring idea about powers. The Nomu that All Might fights was specifically chosen to fight him. These instances happen again and again where Horikoshi strategically places powers against each other, either in an attempt to make a fight more interesting or to show fundamentally a hero at their core level. Fighting All Might, this Nomu is equipped with shock absorption, which directly counters part of the strength that comes from All Might. And we see him defy the odds that someone tried to stack against him, to show what being a symbol is, to show that it is more than just having an ability. To put yourself against the evils of this world with the knowledge that they will try to use your weaknesses against you, that they will strike you where you are most vulnerable, and you, in defiance, must choose to
Beyond plus ultra.
This first season is built upon this idea, starting with Deku making it to UA, to him utilizing One for All the best he can while breaking his bones in the process, to All Might declaring what it means to be the symbol of peace. The fundamentals of this world get placed, and in Season 2, we see our characters start to become fleshed out. A tournament allows us to see them interact in new ways, with Todoroki being a special mention. Then, in the halfway point of Season 2, we get introduced to Stain, and with a murderous manifesto, we learn his very critical perspective on what our original perceptions of this world were. There were plenty of things to critique about how the show first started, maybe being its unoriginality, perhaps its characters, and the wet paper bag that we soon to realize Deku really was, but the first 3 seasons were where I was extremely invested. Season 3 has the peak of what the show becomes, with us now getting a first look at our main antagonist, All for One, someone who previously we saw small glimpses through Shigaraki, but now with a full frontal confrontation, we get to see him in the flesh. But this is also where we see what in my mind is a critical flaw in My Hero. This confrontation happens on episode 10 and 11 of a 24-episode season. Now, who the fuck's idea was it to put a season-ending level event in the front half of the season? Who? Whose idea was it to blow this load so goddamn fast that for the rest of the season, you know what we get? An episode about moving into the dorms. An episode about learning new moves. Like 6 episodes about the provisional license test. an episode about the lamest OVA ever, an episode about All Might shit-talking All for One, the last episode, Bakugo and Deku fighting for no real reason. The entire pacing of the show follows this horrible cycle where we have extremely important episodes that begin to weave a large plot that are followed by lackluster, boring episodes with no real stakes, while our main villains lick their wounds and remain out of our eye. The grander story at large suffers from this problem as well. Honestly, in Season 3, I had forgotten about the League of Villains when I get to the dumbass scuffle between Bakugo and Deku at 8% of his full power. This is where I think my hero fails, and what it wants to do and what its characters have the capacity to fulfill. There's a disconnect here in these two aspects that I feel is what stalls an otherwise interesting plotline. These characters aren't deep enough to withstand the singular encounters that we see, and instead of continuing on the greater picture, we get introduced to a new small aspect that isn't even in the same frame. The pacing of the first season is fine, with relationships like Bakugo and Deku. As they're just starting out, they are stable enough for the encounters we see. But after the tournament, and then him being saved, after Bakugo learns about One For All, you would fucking think that we'd have some goddamn resolution. But 200 chapters later, as Bakugo is sacrificing himself for Deku, there's still development happening on these same two characters. Meanwhile, we have every other person from 1A lacking anything outside of Shoto. All of our pro heroes except for All Might and Endeavor are lackluster. Our graduate students get one arc. The Liberation Army feels like a tertiary villain force. Our League of Villains get one arc. And we get introduced to like 40 other students who all disappear after their introduction. And I'm left feeling exhausted after hearing new names for 3 seasons to the point where I don't even know who the fuck All For One is. And I don't even know why I should care about Shigaraki. While Horikoshi has gone on record multiple times saying that he has no intention of ever trying to be like One Piece, his actions don't reflect that. His original intention was to keep it short like other shonen manga, but with each next season and with seemingly 10 new characters and 3 new villains that all amount to short stories and character arcs that are circular in nature, we stagnate by the 4th season, crawl into the 5th, and now we're in the 6th season and the final war saga isn't even halfway fully animated. So this outcome doesn't follow his original statement, and the story suffers because of it. Since we are at the end here, so with hindsight, we can see who and what was actually important. Shigaraki and All For One are the biggest bad and have been reoccurring villains this entire time. They were the antithesis to our heroes, and the entire plot revolves around All Might and All For One, and the lineage age battle that is formed from the respective quirks, originating from All For One and his younger brother. Which is interesting, but it lacks any real punch because we never saw any of this. We were never shown the previous battles. We were never shown the previous heroes that All For One beat outside of the vestiges, and we were never shown what life was like under his control. Going off the things we weren't shown, we were never shown what it was like when quirks first originated, what ramifications it had on the world at large. More importantly, what it was like for those who first came under the punishment of government. We are never shown the oppression that comes from systemic control that has powers of its own. I bring this up because Horikoshi specifically said he was also a big fan of American films and comics, like Spider-Man, the Sam Raimi trilogy.
Look at little Goblin Jr. Gonna cry?
Star Wars, and X-Men, which he all used for inspirations. I mean, these inspirations are obviously very direct, with basically All For One and One For All acting as the light and dark side, and this quirked world is basically just X-Men. Which is why it's so confusing that we don't see the major political aspect that makes X-Men so compelling. The biggest threat to the existence of X-Men and Xavier's School for Gifted Children is humanity. It is the society that they live in, because as soon as it is shown that they are too dangerous for the rest of society, then they can be persecuted at will and treated as villains just for being born different. This is already an established plot point. It's the entirety of characters like Dabi, like Toga, like Spinner, like Tomoro, who were born with innately evil or innately malicious quirks. They were persecuted for looking different, for being born incorrectly, and were shunned from society for it. The worst part is we're only shown this in the arc of My Villain Academia, which is in my mind one of the best arcs. I mean, it was super interesting finally understanding why someone like Spinner would even follow Tomura in the first place. But this doesn't come until season 5, episode 108. And before this, we have no idea who these characters were, why they banded together, and we saw them in the first season. This is too little too late in my mind. You can't expect us to dawdle around, fighting people like Overhaul, Gentle Criminal, and the 5 other training arcs we endured while having no updates on our villains, then basically fast forwarding through their development, and then we're at the end of the story. Ask me this, why do we need the provisional license exams? Why do we have the joint training? Why do we spend time on a villain that doesn't expand the story at all, except for giving us a quirk that actually would let our hero win in the end? I understand wanting to show our characters grow slowly, to show them coming into themselves like the young teens that they are, but seeing them go through menial tasks after menial tasks, all of which become obsolete because in a couple of months they would be fighting the final boss anyways, it means that we don't have the time. You can't fit all of this other bullshit in the time that you gave yourself. But I still come back every week for the newest chapter. I'm still reading. I'm not watching, but I am reading. Why? Because there's a part of me that still likes this story. No matter how corny it is, no matter how dog shit I think the pacing is, and no matter how much I don't give a fuck about these main villains, I still enjoy the idea of my hero. And there's one moment that has kept me around this long. The last two episodes of an otherwise lacking season 4 showcase Endeavor, who becomes the number one hero out of necessity, not out of his own strength, and now he becomes the new symbol of peace. Just like how All Might vs. Nomu caps off the first season, we echo that here as well. In the episode, Endeavor and Hawks talk about how important it is for him to become the new symbol of hope. I love these episodes because they encapsulate what I said were the foundational elements of my hero: defiance. Early in the episode, before we get to the final battle, Endeavor and Hawks are simply walking to a meeting fans on the street and such, and it is here where we see how Endeavor is perceived. While Hawks is a suave guy, bantering with people and signing children's backpacks, people are simply afraid of approaching Endeavor. And even one of his biggest fans confuses him in the image that Endeavor thought he portrayed. He isn't a symbol yet. He really isn't the number one hero, and he hasn't earned that respect from anyone yet, especially not his family. It is in this episode we see Endeavor defy those expectations. Back to the fight. Earlier I talked about Horikoshi specific when choosing what quirks that he pits against one another. This advanced Nomu has the power of extreme regeneration, speed, flight, and strength, and surprisingly some level of intellect. At the start of the fight, Endeavor wanted to bring this thing in, because that's what All Might would have done. See, with the powers that All Might has, he would actually have had a hard time fully destroying every part of this Nomu, because of its regeneration. Yes, I'm not saying he wouldn't beat it, he would beat it of course, but it would be by submission. And Endeavor tries to emulate this, because that's what the number one hero does. And in the attempt, he loses an eye. And it is here where we realize he can't hide in the shadow of All Might anymore. To be the number one hero, he must change. He must be different. And it is only with his quirk of fire that he can turn this Nomu to dust. In the scene itself, Endeavor recognizes this Nomu as him in the past, a power-hungry monster that would destroy all that was in his way. And with his new position, he has to destroy that past. He has to defy who he was. He has to defy the doubts that are placed on him. He has to grab the position handed to him and show what it truly means to be a number one hero. To show every lousy, no good criminal that a symbol of hope is around, and it won't die here. Not today. Not ever. And with an explosion of fire, and as the dust settles, I look around and realize that that was 3 years ago. And what do I have today? I get to be excited to see Stain appear after 5 years of thinking he was dead, to instantly die in the new chapter. Goodbye, my hero. It was fun while it lasted.